Thank you for tuning into the Short Stacks. I'm Lisa Quintero, Young Adult Librarian.
And I'm Lizzie Jelly, Virtual Engagement Librarian.
This is the show where we talk to you about what we've been reading, listening to, or watching. And today we have a special interview with Tea Krulos about his book, American Madness, the story of the Phantom Patriot and how conspiracy theories hijacked American consciousness.
Excellent. We are super excited to have you here and to talk a little bit about this book and some of your other work as well. But before we dive in, for our listeners, I would love if you could give us kind of a brief synopsis of what your book is about, just a little taste for those of our listeners who haven't read it yet.
Sure. American Madness is about a very unique person that I stumbled across meeting named Richard McCaslin. And at first I think I was attracted to the story because he's an interesting character, but as I continued to work on it, I saw it tying into the bigger picture, which is the problem with conspiracy theory and the impact it's had on our society.
I'll add a little bit to that. So for those who don't know, Richard McCaslin is a guy who called himself the Phantom Patriot. He was like a real-life superhero, or saw himself as a real-life superhero, and he infiltrated a place called Bohemian Grove in California and thought he was taking down the man.
Yeah.
But when he showed up, it was nothing like he expected it to be. Like, he was going to get rid of the statue, but the statue was made of concrete instead of wood, and set fire to something in a building, and it ended up setting off sprinkler systems, and so everything just kind of got botched, and he ended up getting arrested and going to prison for, was it 9 years? 6 years?
Oh, like 6.5 years, and then another 3 years on parole as well.
Okay.
So.
And yeah, so apparently Bohemian Grove, I had never heard of it before, and it's apparently a place where a lot of wealthy folks, politicians, artists meet up in California for a bro down every year. No women allowed, and they just basically like drink a lot and have a weird seance, for lack of a better term, around this owl statue.
The worst kind of boys club.
It's genuinely weird. It's a very weird story.
Yeah.
So.
And it started, like the 1800s, was it?
Yes.
I saw that, Oscar Wilde was there, presidents.
Jack London was a member. Mark Twain was like an honorary member in the early days. So. Yeah,
and then I remember reading in your book that, Nixon and Reagan talked about who would run for office at what time there and things like that. It's just like, okay, so this is just a weird boys club, and that's not cool, but at the same time, are they, people eating children and sacrificing virgins and doing all that sort of thing, which is apparently what Richard McCaslin thought was happening there.
Yeah.
So, do you think that conspiracy theory has you said it hijacked American consciousness. Do you think it's hijacked global consciousness as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I originally thought of it as more of an American phenomenon, but it's not. Definitely not. There's always been some conspiracy throughout the ages around the globe, but it seems like, a lot of American conspiracy theories are spreading to other countries too. There's been QAnon marches in Germany and other European countries, and so I know that Brazil has a president who's very similar in that he likes to spread conspiracy theories himself. So, it's a global problem now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was talking to Lizzie a little bit about that and how, I grew up being really into weird things like Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken and, Unsolved Mysteries, but it wasn't a thing that you actually, or at least I didn't actually believe it was real. Like my child brain wanted to believe it was real, but I was also this is just, fun stories, just like stories about dragons or, vampires or whatever.
Right.
And it seems to be that more and more people are believing these things to be true. What would you attribute that to, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, my original view of conspiracy theory was I thought it was kind of charming. I was of age in the 90s when the X-Files was on. And
big X-Files fan.
That's to me what conspiracy theory was. It was kind of this fun, creepy mystery. They had these characters called the Lone Gunmen on the show. And they were certainly quirky, but, they're also portrayed as being intelligent and kind of right about things. So, but some of the stuff that people believe now, like the world being flat, or that reptilian aliens are secretly disguised as world leaders, it's just so shocking that there's a significant amount of people that believe this stuff. And I think it's a mix of many things, one being sort of a lack of faith in the mainstream media and our government. Our government has lied about a lot of stuff in the past. So there's this sort of mass mistrust. And that makes it easier for someone to get sucked down like a YouTube rabbit hole, where they're watching videos that sometimes are presented in a very interesting way, where you're like, oh, okay, I kind of see what their logic is. So, and being that people spend so much time on the internet now, I think it's just been inevitable that more and more people fall into these beliefs.
Yeah, and I guess, we can do things now that weren't possible. I mean, before you could, manipulate images a little bit, but now with Photoshop and things, you can create these whole new images and make people believe certain things are real that aren't actually there.
Yeah, and I mean, even the technology improving, like if you watch a show on InfoWars, it's really slick now, It looks like they're in a professional news studio and that they're a legitimate news source because it's presented that way.
Yeah.
So it kind of tricks your mind and being like, there must be something to it, otherwise you wouldn't have this fancy setup.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I guess now everybody can do this stuff. We can do a podcast here in the library, and people can make a TV show at home with, just a little camera on their phone and do something on YouTube. It's so much more accessible. So I guess that's part of what potentially has made people more distrustful of the media, since so many people can do things, but at the same time, it's like, we have to get our information from somewhere.
Right. It gets more complicated. The more information is out there, the more you have to actually have some information literacy and be able to weed through this kind of stuff. But yeah, I was so wild. I'm still decompressing from reading the book, honestly, because there's just so much going on here.
It's an intense story.
It's so much to unpack, and so interesting how just this web that all weaves together, and it's all kind of interrelated and bouncing off each other, and it's just... Yeah. My brain is still exploding a little bit.
Yeah, but mine is too.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad that we're together in that. But one thing that really stood out to me was kind of, as we were talking about kind of the rise of the internet and social media, is the pacing of the book as well. We see in the beginning, Richard's really hesitant to even have a computer in his house. And by the end, he's a YouTube star, more or less, making videos, trying to get famous using these tools. And I'm wondering how you feel about, as the book goes on, the pace really keeps up and there's suddenly more and more conspiracy theories coming into play. And if you think really social media has been a big part of that, or what that looks like in spreading these ideas to more people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. I mean, if you take, for example, during the pandemic, of course, there's a lot of fear, a lot of anger. And so this documentary called The Plandemic was released. And because of social media, it spread so quickly. It had several million views within just a couple of days because everyone was sharing it on Facebook and Twitter to a lesser extent. But that's what makes it so dangerous, because if you look at something like the Bohemian Grove, that conspiracy took a very long time to get anywhere. It was just kind of whispered about. And once in a while, you might find a fringe publication that would write something about it. But it's not it spread at the snap of the fingers like conspiracies nowadays can do. And again, with the pandemic, you have a period of time where a lot of people are spending a lot more time on the internet. And so they're digesting that a lot faster, too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because Richard in the book, seems to draw a lot of conclusions from a lot of things that most people wouldn't necessarily draw. And I actually saw a meme this morning that was it was some woman tweeted that Omicron and Delta spelled out media control, and then somebody else pointed out they also spell out erotic almond. What's your point? But people are looking in all these places, these signs that these things are happening.
Yeah.
And so you got to know Richard over the years. What was your sense of how he got there and why he was, kind of the way he was?
How he got into conspiracy?
Yeah.
Well, he was he went through a very tough period of his life. He was raised as an only child. His relationship with his parents, especially his father, wasn't especially great. They were very much into Christianity, and they were into Christianity at a time when like the Satanic Panic was starting. So I think that kind of informed how he looked at some things. But then he had this terrible like falling down part of his life where both of his parents died relatively close to each other. He was an only child. He didn't have a lot of good friends. He lost his job during this period because he wanted to go visit his dying parents, and he got fired from a job that he really liked. He was a performer at Six Flags in a stunt show where he actually played Batman, who was like his childhood hero. So I think all of this, and there was other stuff too, all this negativity was really swirling around in his head. His parents had left him a sizable inheritance, but he didn't really have anything that he wanted to spend money on. So I think he was really lost, and he was looking for something that would give his life meaning. And he just happened to be watching Austin Cable Access, and he saw this quote-unquote documentary made by Alex Jones that talked about the Bohemian Grove. And he kind of filled in some of the blanks himself, as conspiracy theorists tend to do. And he was like, no way, they've got like children in that retreat that they're sacrificing in front of this owl statue, and I'm going to stop it. So I think that sort of gave him a mission in life, and he adopted this superhero persona and got a bunch of weapons, and he had been in the Marines, so, you know, he had some training as to how to infiltrate a place. And then at a certain point, I think that he was like, all right, I'm going to do it now, and I don't really care if I live or die. So.
Yeah, and you wrote a book on real-life superheroes. So what did you find, like, drives those folks? Is it that they're just, like, you know, people who are really into comics and were like, I want to do good for the world? Or is it people who are more like Richard, where they're like, there's these conspiracies and we need to do something about it because nobody else is going to do something?
Yeah, and that's how I met Richard, by the way. My first book, Heroes in the Night, I was working on that in 2010. It was published in 2013. And I had a blog where I was just kind of giving updates about what I was working on. And he stumbled across that and messaged me. So real-life superheroes, they vary quite a bit in like their motivation and you know, what they're hoping to accomplish. Some of them are a very mild take, I would say, where they try to do charity events and they have this colorful persona where they try to attract attention. And I think that's, you know, that's pretty cool. That's fun. Some of them have like sort of an activist angle, like animal rights activists or something like that. And then there are some that think that they're Batman. And they want to go out there and try to fight criminals like in a comic book, except, you know, real life is not at all like a comic book. So Richard is very unique. That's why I mentioned him very briefly in Heroes in the Night, but I knew that his story was something that intersected with real life superheroes, but he wasn't like a very typical example of that. So yeah, his mission was a lot more hardcore than the other real life superheroes I talked to. And he was sort of ahead of that idea because he had started adapting his own superhero personas in the 80s, actually. And then it kind of climaxed with him raiding the Bohemian Grove in 2002. And the real-life superhero movement, as we know today, didn't really get started until around 2005 or 2006.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that he did, like, a lot of cosplay, and, like, but before cosplay was, like, a thing, like, he made a lot of his own costumes and created his own superheroes, and I, like, the story of him going out with his, like, teenage friend in Ohio and being like, we're gonna fight crime, and then being like, there's nothing going on. And I'm like, that is what I imagined that would go like. Yeah,
the Lynx and Ironclaw. What was so great about Richard, too, is I don't think he was a liar at all. Like, he had this kind of hard to believe story sometimes, but in that case, I interviewed the guy who was a teenager. I went out with him on patrol, and he was like, yeah, we did that. We dressed up in a costume and patrolled Zanesville, Ohio, and nothing happened. And we went to a Comic-Con together, and so, but yeah, the cosplay stuff too, he was very creative, which is why I think I developed, some feelings of sympathy for him. I thought he went through this hard period of his life that he wasn't equipped to deal with. I thought he was very creative. He made these very nicely rendered costumes, including, like you say, some of famous, well-known characters, as well as some of his own creations. And he was an illustrator. He drew his own comic books. So
yeah, he penned a comic in prison, right?
Yes, yeah. As he pointed out, probably the only vigilante to draw a comic book about himself while in prison.
Certainly unique, that is for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that really comes across in the book as well, that Richard is a human character in a lot of ways in this story, and in real life. He's very complex, lots of things driving him, and it was sad at the end. Like, we feel for him towards the end of the book, and we really grow to understand and appreciate what he's been through and how it led to where he ended up.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to be angry at conspiracy theorists because you want to be like, how could you be so stupid? And why would you put yourself in danger and, or put other people in danger? But, I mean, they all have some story of how they got there, and it's usually, something bad that happened in their life, or, just the pressure of the world causes them to snap a little bit. So.
Yeah, it's like he seemed very lonely, and and I feel like when people are that lonely, sometimes you feel like you have nothing left to lose, and you just kind of go all out with whatever it is that you're doing. I mean, he went out and bought how many weapons before he went to raid the Bohemian Grove?
Yeah, that's what really caught my eye about his story. He had sent me this message and said that he had raided this place called the Bohemian Grove. So of course I hopped on Wikipedia and read about the Bohemian Grove. I was like, wow, this is actually kind of weird. And then he sent me his comic, which in some other paperwork, and I was like, wow, I've not encountered a story like this before. He entered the Bohemian Grove, and he had a rifle, a pistol, a ninja sword, a crossbow, a smoke bomb launcher, a hunting knife, and he had a billy club in his truck. So he was well armed because he thought that when he was going to enter, he was going to find a literal group of Satanists who were sacrificing people, and that he was going to need to possibly have a firefight with them so he could save the people that they were going to try to kill. And of course, what he actually found in there was nothing except for a very shocked groundskeeper, and then the responding officers who showed up.
Yeah, and it was interesting because the officers are just nothing like this has ever happened here before.
No, I cannot imagine. I mean, imagine you're getting a call to this remote place in the woods, and this guy, he was wearing his full costume at the time, which has this kind of creepy-looking skull mask and a jumpsuit. And so this guy comes from behind a tree holding a giant gun. I'm sure it was extremely shocking to them.
Yeah. He reminds me like the Punisher or something.
Yeah, totally.
And then there's this whole story where Les Claypool comes into it. And I was like, what? From Primus.
Yeah, that was it was so funny. So Les Claypool lives in the same area that the Bohemian Grove is in, Occidental, California, where he has a ranch, and he has a recording studio on his ranch and stuff. And Richard's story was not well known at the time. It had only appeared in some regional newspapers, like the San Francisco Chronicle wrote a little bit, and then there's sort of a rural newspaper, the Sonoma County Free Press, and they wrote a few articles about him. So Les Claypool happens to read one of these articles and gets inspired to write this little ditty about the Phantom Patriot called Phantom Patriot that appeared on one of his solo albums. And, it was this kind of the news report set to music pretty much. Talked about him raiding the Grove or whatever. So I was like, I should try to talk to Les Claypool. And, you got to learn sometimes if you're trying to get in contact with someone, sometimes you give up and sometimes you're persistent. And I just emailed like his publicity people over and over again. I was like, hey, it's me again. Just wondering if I could talk to Les for a minute. Finally, they're like, fine, you got 10 minutes on the phone with him. Primus was on tour with Tool.
Okay.
And they got me on the phone, and he was a little freaked out because he was like, you think this guy's going to like show up at one of my shows and try to kill me? I was like, nah. I didn't want to say no. I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah, well, especially with like, we can go into it later, but the whole Shelley Wright story is like,
yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
So it was kind of an awkward conversation, and about 8 minutes into it, like his publicist got on the line. He's like, all right, T, we're done. Bye. I was like, well, at least I got to talk to Les Claypool for a few minutes on the phone and got a quote or two from him. And then Richard's defense attorney told me this great story about how Les Claypool actually got in trouble for fishing with the wrong hook in the river near the Bohemian Grove. And he represented him and got his fine knocked down. And then afterwards, he was able to show Les Claypool Richard's costume, which he still had in his office because they were going to destroy it along with the other evidence. And he was like, nope, I want that costume. And so that costume is still sitting like in a file box in his office.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Shelley Wright story. It's like he had this crush on this country singer and then just like relentlessly pursued her, right?
Yes. Yeah. This was, I would say, definitely the most challenging part for me writing the book because I had no idea. I had been talking to Richard for about 2 years. And, you know, I met him in San Francisco. I met him 3 different times in person. And we were driving around. He was like, you ever hear of Shelley Wright? I was like, no. He was like, oh, she's a country singer. I was like, okay, I don't really listen to a lot of country. And then it kind of dropped. But a few months later, in an email, he was like, said something about Shelley Wright. I was like, what's going on here? So I Googled his name and her name in quotes, and I got one hit. And it was from MTV.com. And they said how lucky Richard McCaslin had won a charity dinner date with Shelley Wright by paying $14,500.
Okay.
I was like, oh my God, what is going on now?
Yeah, like you said, he had a lot of money and didn't know what to do with it. Weapons, dates.
So I emailed them. I was like, so what's going on with Shelley Wright here? And he sent me a handwritten, like 21-page accounts of how he had developed a crush on her. She was popular at the time. And he saw that she was doing this charity event. So he drove to Nashville and kept bidding until he won the dinner date. And then it's so funny because he's telling the story from his perspective, but you can totally read between the lines. And it's very obvious that she was just being polite to him. And he thought that they were falling in love with each other. And he became a little obsessive about it. He kept writing her letters, and then he'd try to write to her brother. And her fan club was like, "Hey, you got to stop doing this." And he was kind of upset about it. But yeah, I mean, for the rest of his life, I think he was kind of had this fixation on her a little bit. But one thing is, he credits her for saving his life, because when he was in the Bohemian Grove, he was prepared to die and thought he might die in a shootout with the police. But he says at the last minute, he kind of thought that the possibility that he might see her again someday made him surrender to the police. So, and then, you know, it got more and more frustrating with him, because later she revealed that she was having her own personal struggle at that time, which is that she was closeted, right? And this was very difficult for her, because she was in the country music scene, which was not very open to that. But when he found that out, instead of being like, oh, okay, you know, he developed this conspiracy that she had been part of a government brainwashing program, and it went on, and again, it was creepy. It was hard for me to write about because everything that I've seen is that she's a very wonderful, charitable person who's done a lot of good in the world. So I didn't want to drag her into this story, but at the same time, I think it was important to talk about because it was a big part of his life, whether she knew that or not.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and part of me wonders, it's like he was so lonely and alone. If he had had more friends, if perhaps he wouldn't have developed some of these ideas about other people. Because sometimes when you have friends and people to talk to, they can be like, yeah, no, that's not right.
Right, they can bring you back down to earth.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of but if you're just in your head all the time, and it seems like he spent a lot of his life just in his head.
Yeah, and developing this sort of fantasy version of himself and other people.
In reality,
Yeah.
So what got you into writing about extremists and superheroes and all that?
I mean, I've always been attracted to unusual people, subcultures. When I was in high school, I was way into punk rock, so I hung out with punk rockers and goth kids and skaters and metalheads and stuff like that. So my first book about real-life superheroes, I mean, I really loved superhero comics when I was a kid. So it was just kind of the perfect blend of something I knew and was familiar with and this unusual subculture. And, I was really just kind of interested in it from a sociological perspective. And then Richard's story fell into my lap. And like I said, I was a little bit, I thought I knew a lot about conspiracy, which it turned out I didn't at all. But I certainly, when I was younger, I loved reading about UFO cases. I had some interest in the JFK assassination. I had read, what's the writer? Crossfire by Jim Mars. Okay. Yeah, that's the book that Oliver Stone's JFK movie was based on. And so I had this interest in conspiracy, and but it went to much darker places than I thought it would. It's because I wasn't aware of this very dark side, Alex Jones and crisis actors at school shootings and stuff like that. Yeah. I was like, ooh. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I learned a lot from your book because I'm aware of some of that stuff, and I know the name Alex Jones, but I didn't know how he got a start, or about how it doesn't surprise me that people come back at him and are like, I did this because of Alex Jones, and he's like, I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah,
but
over and over again. Yeah,
but it was really interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting to watch that cycle repeat, even when he had met with Richard, right? Alex Jones. They had actually met and talked about Bohemian Grove, and at the end of it, just washed his hands of him and continues to do that. And we see him doing this for decades at this point. It's
it's his classic routine. It's really a story that's repeated itself. I feel like Richard was kind of the first person who took him seriously and did something, and then Alex Jones was like, I have no idea why he did that. That's so crazy. It's like, well, come on. He in this Bohemian Grove documentary, he very strongly implies that they're sacrificing people inside of the grove in front of this owl statue. And then, I mean, I think this is one of the most damning things. At the end of the documentary, he's standing on a road outside of the Bohemian Grove telling you driving instructions to get there. So I'm like, you not only gave this guy a motivation to go there,
you give him the directions.
You told him exactly how he could find this hidden place. So, but yeah, it repeats itself over and over again. There was an incident similar to Richard where a guy invaded a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. because he believed there was child trafficking ring there, and he had seen a short video on InfoWars. It wasn't Alex Jones specifically, but it was a video on his site. Even January 6th, Alex Jones was there yelling at people through a bullhorn, riling them up. And then when they started attacking the Capitol, he was out of there.
Yeah.
So
he's just an instigator,
Yeah, total instigator.
And you guys are working on a documentary about the book?
Yes, it was very exciting. Eric Hayden is the director, and he and his wife Kim are producers.
Okay.
And he just heard me on a podcast, actually.
Cool.
Read the book, really enjoyed it, and we've been slowly working on adapting it into a documentary. I was able to go out to California in October to help him interview some people. We even went to the Bohemian Grove. We didn't try to sneak in because that would probably be foolish because we'd just get arrested. But we were able to at least film some of the area around it, and
yeah, because you're not allowed to film actually in the Grove, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No pictures, no phones.
Yeah, no media at all. There are media people who are involved, but they're not, or are part of the club, but they're not allowed to talk about it. It's kind of this air of secrecy that's led. I mean, I kind of feel like if they would just let like a news crew in to look around, then
if people would chill a little bit more about
maybe.
it.
But it's hard to convince a conspiracy theorist of anything. So.
Well, with all of this layers and layers of conspiracy theory, all kinds of just bananas stuff going on in here, at the end of the book, you talk about how you had to really kind of climb out of that rabbit hole and take some time to decompress, if you will. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for the rest of us who are kind of climbing out of this conspiracy theory rabbit hole anymore of how we can decompress from that and kind of come back down to earth a little bit?
Yeah, it takes a very heavy toll, I think, thinking about it, trying to figure out why people believe this, and just, some of the aspects like the Sandy Hook denial, it's just like, it makes you angry and upset. So it's very challenging. I wrote that at the end of the book, and, I had wrapped this book up in 2019. And so I was like, all right, I'm kind of done with this.
And then the
but then there was this tidal wave of conspiracy about everything, the pandemic, the election, some of the civil unrest. So it's very hard still to even turn on the news. But I think I would just say that people should try to find stuff that they enjoy to distract them from that, and try to put it into perspective. And just unfortunately, it's something that we have to accept as being part of life now. Yeah. And in talking to people since this book came out, I've discovered that there are so many people. I've talked to so many people that they're like, this book reminded me of this guy I used to work with, or that lives down the street from me, or is my aunt or my uncle or my ex, So it's kind of shocking to know that there are so many people that have this line of thinking out there.
Yeah. So what are you working on these days, besides the documentary?
That documentary is super fun. I'm also working on a short documentary. I wrote an article for Milwaukee Magazine that's about horror hosts.
Oh, yeah.
And there are people like Vampira, Elvira, Sven Gulli.
Oh, yeah, Sven Gulli's great.
But they have their own shows, and there's an unusually high concentration of them in Kenosha for whatever reason.
Okay.
So I wrote this article for Milwaukee Magazine, and some local friends of mine are helping translate that into a documentary short, which is super fun. We've been hanging out on set with the horror hosts and interviewing them. And then I just had a short project. It's called Brady Street Pharmacy Stories and Sketches. It's published by Vegetarian Alcoholic Press, which is a small press here in Milwaukee. And it's just a short collection of short stories about a place I used to work at that was sort of a greasy spoon / drugstore called the Brady Street Pharmacy. So some stories about like the regulars and some of my coworkers. That was a fun little project, and it just came out last week.
Oh, wow.
And then you do a podcast of your own too, right?
Yes. My podcast is Tea's Weird Week. Usually interview a guest, and then me and my friend Heidi Erickson talk about weird news of the week, and we close out with a song that's usually by a local band. We have a trivia question in there. So we just wrapped up a season, and we'll be back with more episodes later next month.
Cool. All right. So any favorite books you'd like to share with our audience? Whether they're about conspiracy or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a story, like I was saying, it's hard to decompress from, but at the same time, I'm very interested in where all this is going and also staying on top of some of it. So I just read a great book by Mike Rothschild. It's called The Storm is Upon Us. And it kind of takes you through step by step about QAnon. Which I wrote in American Madness. I wrote a chapter titled Q, but it's really just kind of the beginning of that story because I was writing about in 2019. It's, of course, turned into a very big, worrisome thing now. So his book has a little bit more information on how it developed and where it might be going. I'm trying to think what else I've read lately. I read a good book by Matt Taibbi called Hate Incorporated. It's just kind of about how political reporting has become sort of like a sporting event, left versus right, and what motivates some of that. I'm trying to think. What else?
It's a hard question when we put you on the spot.
No. Okay, so I don't remember the author, but the illustrator is Eric Powell. And it was a graphic novel about Ed Gein. That just came out, I think. I think it's titled like "Did you hear what Ed Gein did?" or something like that. I just picked up a copy, so I'm looking forward to reading that because I really enjoy his artwork, and of course, Ed Gein is a super creepy story with a Wisconsin root, so that always grabs my interest.
Yeah, I'm curious about that one. Yeah, I ordered the graphic novels here, and a few years ago I ordered My Friend Dahmer by...
I read that one too.
Yeah, and that one was also interesting since it also has a Milwaukee tie. And one more question that just out of curiosity. Because you mentioned in the book that Tea Krulos is not your real name, it's your pen name. Where did you come up with that name?
It's a name that really started to evolve. In middle school, people called me T, like the letter T, and then I kind of fleshed it out into a first name. And the Krulos thing was something that I developed during my high school punk rock days, just because I thought it sounded awesome at the time. And now I'm just sort of attached to it.
Cool.
But yeah, I mentioned it in the book, which is the first time I've ever mentioned that it's just a pen name. But I thought it was worth bringing up because I had to tell Richard at some point that it wasn't my real name. And he was, of course, being sort of a paranoid person. He was like, what? What's going on? I was like, oh, it's a pen name, I was like, hey, everyone's got a pen name. Everyone from Mark Twain to Ice Cube. And then his response was so funny because he was like, I know what a pen name is, but you might want to pick your examples a little better because Mark Twain was a member of the Bohemian Club and Ice Cube is one of the Illuminati. I was like, I did not even think of that would be a response, but it makes sense coming from you.
Yeah, it's like we could think in completely different ways.
But
Okay, I accept this.
But that's just how he was about everything. He had this very deep interpretation of symbolism and word choice and numbers that the normal person would just pass by and not even blink. But to him, it had a very deep meaning.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us on the Sherwood Stacks. If you want to check out T's book, it's available here at the library, or you can get a copy from local booksellers Boswell or Lion's Tooth. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up here?
Oh, thanks for having me. I love the library so much. It's been a very important part of my life. And of course, my books couldn't happen without the library because that's where I do a lot of my research, get my materials from.
Cool.
So, always glad to be in a library.
Oh, thank you. And now for some library events. We have a lot of fun coming up for you this January. First of all, don't forget that the library is closed on New Year's Day, Saturday, January 1st, but we'll be open again on January 2nd for normal hours. We have Art Cart to go every Wednesday this week. Our PM Book Club is meeting on Wednesday, January 5th. And the Job Center of Wisconsin will be here on Wednesday, January 12th for drop-in help for job seekers as well. We have a Family Fun Night to Go kit ready for you on Tuesday, January 11th. Rhyme Time Tuesday continues that same morning as well. And Rhyme and Read Lapsit begins on Tuesday, January 18th at 9 a.m. And don't forget, you do need to register in advance. We also have plenty of events for our teens coming up in January as well, with a Teen Advisory Board meeting on Tuesday, January 25th, and Teen Take and Make Thursday continues on Thursday, January 27th.
The Shoreward Stacks is produced and recorded by Lisa Quintero and Lizzie Jelly for the Shoreward Public Library. Music by the show is called Ice Flow and is by Kevin MacLeod and can be found at incompetech.com.